They think you don't see it, the subtle ways they shape your decisions, the quiet ways they make you second-guess yourself, the invisible threads they pull to keep you moving in the direction they want, not the direction you need. And the worst part, you've been letting them, not because you're weak, not because you're naive, but because you were never taught that control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like concern, sometimes it sounds like advice, sometimes it wears the mask of love. You've felt it, haven't you? That strange sensation when someone asks you a question that isn't really a question, when someone gives you a choice that isn't really a choice, when someone makes you feel guilty for wanting something they don't approve of. That's not care, that's architecture. Someone is building a cage around you, and they're using your own emotions as the bars. Niccolo Machiavelli spent his life in the corridors of power, watching how influence really works. Not the fairy tale version they teach you in school, the real version. The one where good people get controlled by those who understand the game better. He saw how princes fell not because they were overthrown by armies, but because they were outmaneuvered by those closest to them. He understood that the most dangerous prison is the one you don't realize you're in. And tonight, we're going to dismantle that prison, not with force, not with confrontation, but with something far more powerful, understanding. Because once you see the mechanisms of control, once you understand the architecture of manipulation, you can never be trapped by them again. But before we go further, let me be clear about something. This is not about becoming paranoid. This is not about seeing enemies everywhere. This is about developing a kind of vision that most people never acquire, the ability to see beneath the surface, to recognize when someone is trying to program your behavior, to understand the difference between genuine connection and strategic positioning. Most people walk through life blind to these patterns, and they pay for that blindness with their freedom. Here's what nobody wants to admit. Control is everywhere. It's in the workplace where your manager frames every request as urgent to keep you in a state of constant reaction. It's in relationships where someone uses intermittent affection to keep you guessing, hungry, compliant. It's in families where guilt is deployed like a precision weapon every time you try to establish boundaries. It's in friendships where someone positions themselves as the authority on what's acceptable, what's too much, what you should be doing with your life. And the reason it works so well is because it doesn't announce itself. Real control never does. It operates in the space between words, in tone, in timing, in the careful construction of situations where you feel like you're making free choices, but somehow those choices always benefit someone else. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. He wrote about how the wise prince must learn to recognize when he is being managed. He observed that men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. This wasn't cynicism, this was observation. People want to believe, they want to trust, they want to think that everyone has good intentions, and that desire, that beautiful human instinct, becomes the very mechanism through which they are controlled. So let me ask you something. Who in your life makes you feel like you need their approval before you can move forward? Who makes you explain yourself repeatedly, as if your reasons are never quite good enough? Who responds to your boundaries with hurt feelings, making you comfort them for the limits you tried to set? Who tells you they're just being honest when they criticize you, but can't handle even gentle feedback themselves? These are not random behaviors, these are patterns, and patterns reveal strategy, whether conscious or unconscious. The person deploying them might not even realize they're doing it. They might genuinely believe they're helping you, protecting you, loving you, but impact matters more than intention. And if the impact is that you feel smaller, more uncertain, more dependent, then control is happening regardless of what it calls itself. Now here's where it gets interesting. The first rule of breaking free from control is understanding that you cannot break free through direct confrontation. This is where most people fail. They finally recognize they're being manipulated and they explode. They call it out. They demand change. They draw lines in the sand. And what happens? The controller adapts. They apologize. They promise to do better. They make you feel guilty for being so harsh. And within weeks, sometimes days, the same patterns are back, just wearing different clothes. Machiavelli would tell you this is predictable. He wrote extensively about how power, once tasted, is never willingly surrendered. The person controlling you has something to lose if you become free. Your dependency serves them. Your uncertainty benefits them. Your need for their validation gives them importance, influence, a role to play. They will not let that go just because you asked nicely. So what do you do instead? You become strategically invisible. You stop announcing your moves. You stop explaining your reasoning. You stop seeking permission disguised as advice. You begin making decisions and simply presenting them as facts, not with hostility, not with drama, with calm, unshakable certainty. Let me give you an example. Someone in your life has a pattern of undermining your goals. Every time you share something you're excited about, they find the flaw. They play devil's advocate. They remind you of past failures. They frame it as realism, but it functions as sabotage. The old you would either defend yourself, trying to prove your idea is sound, or you'd internalize their doubt and quietly abandon the goal. Both responses give them power. The new you does something different. You stop sharing your goals with them, not forever, not as punishment, but until the goal is so far along that their opinion is irrelevant. You let your actions speak in a language they can't debate. And when they ask why you didn't tell them, you smile and say something simple. I wanted to be sure before I mentioned it. No accusation, no anger, just a quiet repositioning of the dynamic. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the importance of appearing one way while being another. Not deception for its own sake, strategic opacity. The understanding that you do not owe everyone access to your inner world, especially those who have proven they'll use that access against you. The second principle of breaking free is this: you must become comfortable with other people's discomfort. This is where most people stay trapped. They recognize the control, they see the manipulation. But the moment they start to pull away, the controller deploys emotional consequences, hurt feelings, disappointment, anger, withdrawal of affection. And because you're a decent person, because you don't want to hurt anyone, you step back into the cage. But here's what you need to understand. Their discomfort is not your emergency. Their feelings about your boundaries are not your responsibility to manage. When you start reclaiming your autonomy, the people who benefited from your compliance will not celebrate. They will resist, and they will use every tool they have to pull you back. Machiavelli observed this in political contexts, but it applies everywhere. He noted that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Why? Because you have enemies in all those who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in those who would profit by the new. Translation: when you change the rules of engagement, when you stop playing the game that kept you small, the people who liked that game will fight to restore it. Not because they're evil, but because your growth disrupts their equilibrium. Your strength highlights their strategies. Your freedom threatens their control, so you have to make a choice. Do you want their comfort or your freedom? Because you cannot have both, not at first. Maybe later, after the new dynamic is established, after they've learned that the old tactics no longer work. But in the beginning, you will have to walk through their discomfort without flinching, without explaining, without apologizing for taking up space. This brings us to the third principle: master the art of the non-response. Controllers thrive on engagement. They need you to react, to defend, to explain, to prove. Every time you do, you're handing them data about what buttons to push, what levers still work, where you're still vulnerable. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, it begins to starve. Let me be specific. Someone sends you a message designed to provoke guilt, a reminder of everything they've done for you, a subtle implication that you're being selfish. The old pattern is to immediately respond, to reassure them, to justify your choices. But what if you just didn't? What if you read it, felt the hook, and simply chose not to bite? Not forever, not as a power play, but long enough that your response comes from choice, not reaction. Long enough that you've consulted your own compass instead of their programming. When you finally do respond, it's brief, it's kind, but it doesn't engage with the guilt. It doesn't argue with the frame. It simply moves forward, as if the manipulation wasn't even there. This is psychological mastery. Machiavelli understood that the greatest power often looks like indifference. Not because you don't care, but because you care about the right things. You care about your integrity more than their approval. You care about your direction more than their comfort. And that reordering of priorities changes everything. Now let's talk about something most people miss. The reason you've been so easy to control is not because you're weak, it's because you're empathetic. You feel what others feel. You imagine their perspective. You want harmony. These are beautiful qualities. But in the hands of someone who understands leverage, they become vulnerabilities. The controller has learned, consciously or not, that your empathy is a button they can push. They've learned that if they seem hurt, you'll adjust. If they seem disappointed, you'll try harder. If they seem angry, you'll de-escalate by giving in. They've turned your greatest strength into their greatest tool. So here's the shift. You don't kill your empathy, you direct it. You start extending the same compassion to yourself that you've been giving everyone else. You start asking, what do I need? What serves my growth? What protects my peace? And you let those questions guide you, even when the answers make other people uncomfortable. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn to be not good when necessary. This scandalized people for centuries, but what he really meant was this. Goodness that makes you a doormat is not virtue, it's dysfunction. Real integrity sometimes means disappointing people. Real strength sometimes means letting others sit with the consequences of their behavior instead of rescuing them from it. You are not responsible for managing everyone's emotions. You are not required to shrink so others feel big. You are not obligated to stay stuck so someone else feels comfortable. And the moment you truly internalize this, the moment it moves from concept to conviction, you become uncontrollable. Let me tell you what happens when you start applying these principles. At first, there will be pushback. The people who are used to influencing you will escalate. They'll try harder. They'll deploy bigger emotions. They'll recruit others to their perspective. Suddenly, everyone is concerned about you. Everyone thinks you're changing. Everyone wants to talk about what's going on. This is the extinction burst. It's what happens when a strategy stops working. They're not trying harder because it's working. They're trying harder because it's not. This is the test. This is where you find out if you're serious. Because it would be so easy to go back, to smooth things over, to return to the old dynamic where at least everyone was calm, even if you were dying inside. But if you hold steady, if you maintain your boundaries without aggression, but with absolute consistency, something shifts. They learn not all at once, not with a conversation, but through pattern recognition. They learn that the old tactics don't work anymore. That guilt doesn't move you. That anger doesn't scare you. That withdrawal doesn't break you. And slowly, either they adapt and the relationship evolves into something healthier, or they fade, revealing that the relationship was never about you as a person, only you as a function. Both outcomes are wins. Because either you get a real relationship, or you get freedom from a false one. But you cannot lose by choosing yourself. Now here's something Machiavelli understood that most people miss. Freedom is not a destination, it's a practice. You don't break free from control once and then live happily ever after. You have to maintain your sovereignty daily. Because the world is full of people who will test your boundaries, consciously or unconsciously. Who will see if you're still susceptible to the old programs. Who will try to reinstall the software you worked so hard to delete. This means you need systems, not just insights, systems. Daily practices that keep you anchored in your own authority. Let me give you some. First, the morning audit. Before you check your phone, before you open yourself to the world's demands, you spend 5 minutes asking yourself 3 questions. What do I actually want today? What am I doing out of obligation versus intention? Where am I giving my power away? This simple practice interrupts autopilot. It reminds you that you have agency, that your day is yours to direct, not just react to. Second, the response delay. Anytime someone asks you for something, your default answer becomes, let me check my schedule and get back to you. Not because you're playing games, because you're consulting yourself before you commit. You're creating space between stimulus and response. In that space, you reclaim choice. Third, the relationship inventory. Once a month, you assess. Who in your life energizes you? Who drains you? Who respects your boundaries? Who constantly pushes against them? You're not necessarily cutting people off, but you're being honest about what each relationship actually is, and you're adjusting your investment accordingly. You stop giving level 10 energy to level 3 relationships. Fourth, the silence practice. You deliberately spend time not explaining yourself, not justifying, not defending. You make a decision and you let it stand on its own. This is training. You're teaching yourself that your choices don't require a dissertation, that no is a complete sentence, that you can be kind and firm simultaneously. These practices might seem simple. They are, but simple is not the same as easy. Because every one of these practices will trigger something in you. The guilt, the fear of being seen as selfish, the anxiety about what others will think. That's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's a sign you're doing it right. You're bumping up against the old programming and it's fighting to survive. Let it fight. You don't have to kill it. You just have to stop obeying it. Here's what nobody tells you about becoming uncontrollable. It's lonely at first. Not because you're isolated, but because you're no longer participating in the familiar dances. The people who are used to leading you don't know what to do when you stop following. And until you find your people, the ones who respect autonomy, who celebrate strength, who don't need you to be small, there's a gap. Machiavelli knew this gap well. He spent years in exile, stripped of position, writing in obscurity. He understood that the path of the strategist is often a solitary one, not forever, but for a season, while you're rebuilding, while you're learning to trust yourself more than you trust the crowd. But here's what makes it worth it. On the other side of that loneliness is something most people never experience: true peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everyone approving of you. The deep peace that comes from knowing you are the author of your own life. That you are not being lived by someone else's agenda. That the choices you make, even the mistakes, are yours. This is what sovereignty feels like. Not domination over others. Not the wielding of power to bend people to your will. Not the manipulation or subjugation of those around you. True sovereignty is something far more profound, far more transformative. It's dominion over yourself. Complete, unwavering ownership of your mind, your time, your energy, your direction, your choices, and your sacred life force. It's the ability to stand in the center of your own existence and say with absolute certainty, "This is mine and I decide what happens here." And once you taste it, once you truly experience what it feels like to be the sole authority in your own life, you can never go back. It's impossible. The cage might have been comfortable in some ways. It might have been familiar, predictable, even cozy at times. There's a certain ease in letting others make your decisions, in following the path laid out before you, in surrendering your will to the expectations and demands of everyone around you. But freedom, true freedom, is intoxicating. It's a fire in your veins. It's waking up and realizing that every single choice is yours to make. It's the profound relief of no longer contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. Once you've lived even one day as a sovereign being, the thought of returning to that cage becomes unbearable, suffocating, impossible. So let me bring this home. Let me make this absolutely clear and personal. You are surrounded by people who want to influence you every single day. In every interaction, every conversation, every relationship. Some with good intentions. They genuinely believe they know what's best for you. They think they're helping, guiding, protecting. Some with selfish ones. They want something from you, whether it's your time, your energy, your resources, your compliance, or simply the validation that comes from having power over another person. And most, if we're being honest, with a mixture of both. Most people operate from a complex web of motivations, some noble and some self-serving, often without even being fully aware of which is which in any given moment. And for most of your life, if you're honest with yourself, you've been shaped by whoever had the strongest will, the loudest voice, the most compelling emotional appeal, or the most effective manipulation tactics. You've been molded by parents who projected their unfulfilled dreams onto you, by partners who needed you to be smaller so they could feel bigger, by friends who punished you with withdrawal whenever you stepped outside the box they'd built for you, by society's endless chorus of shoulds and musts and have-tos. Your personality, your choices, your very sense of self has been sculpted by external forces that you probably didn't even recognize as external because they were so constant, so pervasive, so normalized. But that era is over, not because you've become cold, not because you've shut down your heart or built walls so high that nothing can reach you, not because you've decided to become some isolated island, disconnected from humanity. Because you've become conscious, you've woken up, you see the game now. You understand the tactics that have been used on you since childhood. You recognize the patterns, the manipulation strategies, the guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the subtle and not so subtle ways people have been pulling your strings. The manufactured urgency, the weaponized disappointment, the conditional love, the strategic vulnerability designed to obligate you, the way people use your own empathy and kindness against you, and once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you've recognized the matrix of control you've been living in, you can't just forget that knowledge and return to innocent compliance. The question is not whether you'll encounter people who try to control you. You absolutely will. That's guaranteed. Control is woven into the fabric of human relationships. It's in families, friendships, romantic partnerships, workplaces, communities, and every social structure you'll ever be part of. People will continue to use guilt, obligation, fear, and emotional manipulation to try to influence your choices and bend you toward their preferences. The question is whether you'll participate, whether you'll engage with those tactics, whether you'll hand them the levers to your own life, whether you'll confuse their discomfort with your wrongness, mistaking someone else's emotional reaction to your boundary as evidence that you've done something terrible. Machiavelli's great insight was this, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Power is not taken from the strong. It's surrendered by those who don't realize they have it. Think about that. Really let it sink in. You have always had the power. From the very beginning, you've had the power to choose, to decide, to say no, to walk away, to prioritize yourself, to honor your own truth. You just gave it away, piece by piece, year after year, because you were taught that keeping it was selfish, that boundaries were mean, that saying no was unkind, that prioritizing your own needs made you a bad person. You were conditioned to believe that being good meant being accommodating, that being loving meant being available, that being spiritual meant being selfless to the point of self-destruction. But keeping your power is not selfish. It's survival. It's the foundation of everything healthy in your life. Boundaries are not mean, they're necessary. They're the structure that allows authentic relationships to exist. They're the framework that protects your energy, your peace, and your ability to show up as your true self. And saying no to what's wrong for you is the only way to say yes to what's right. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you're saying no to your own truth, your own path, your own alignment. You're betraying yourself, and that betrayal accumulates, creating a life that looks nothing like who you actually are. So here's what you do next. Here's the practical application of everything we've been talking about. You start small. You don't try to revolutionize your entire life overnight. You don't burn down every relationship and structure in a dramatic display of newfound sovereignty. You pick one area where you've been controlled, where you've been giving your power away, where you've been living according to someone else's agenda. Maybe it's your time, constantly being consumed by other people's requests and demands while your own dreams sit untouched. Maybe it's your decisions, always seeking approval and consensus before you make a move. Maybe it's your self-expression, constantly editing yourself to be palatable, acceptable, non-threatening. And in that one area, you start practicing sovereignty. You start acting as the authority in your own life. You stop asking permission from people who have no right to grant or deny it. You stop over-explaining your choices as if you need to build an airtight legal case for why you're allowed to live your own life. You stop shrinking, making yourself smaller, dimming your light, softening your edges, apologizing for taking up space. You simply decide, and then you act on that decision with calm, quiet certainty, and you watch what happens. You observe with curiosity and clarity. You watch who respects it and who fights it. You'll be amazed at how revealing this is. The people who truly love you, who want the best for you, who see you as a sovereign being, will respect your boundaries even if they're disappointed. They might not like your decision, but they'll honor your right to make it. And then you'll see the others, the ones who respond to your sovereignty with anger, guilt-tripping, manipulation, or punishment. The ones who can only relate to you when they have control. And that information is gold. You watch how much energy you get back when you stop leaking it into other people's agendas. You'll be stunned at how much life force you've been hemorrhaging, how exhausted you've been, not from your own life, but from carrying everyone else's expectations. You watch yourself start to trust your own judgment again. That inner voice that's been whispering your truth all along suddenly gets louder, clearer, more confident. Then you expand. You take what you've learned in that one area and you apply it to another area, another boundary, another reclamation of what was always yours, your career, your relationships, your body, your spiritual practice, your creative expression, your daily schedule, your emotional energy. And piece by piece, decision by decision, boundary by boundary, you build a life that belongs to you. Not a life that looks good to others, that photographs well, that makes people comfortable, that fits the template you were handed. A life that feels true to you. A life that resonates with your actual values, your authentic desires, your real purpose. This is the Machiavellian path as it applies to the twin flame journey and personal sovereignty. Not manipulation of others, not scheming to control people or situations, liberation from manipulation, freedom from the control systems you've been living under, not control over people, immunity to their control. The ability to remain centered in your own truth regardless of who's pulling at you, demanding from you, or trying to reshape you. Not coldness, clarity, not shutting down your heart but opening your eyes. Not becoming cruel but becoming conscious. You were never meant to be controlled. This is fundamental. It goes against your very nature as a divine, sovereign being. You were meant to be sovereign, to stand in your own authority, to live from your own center, to make choices aligned with your soul's purpose rather than other people's comfort. And every day you choose yourself, every moment you hold your ground, every time you let someone be disappointed without abandoning your truth, every instance where you stay rooted in your knowing, even when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong, you're becoming what you were always supposed to be. Uncontrollable, not because you're difficult, stubborn, or combative, not because you're trying to prove something or rebel for rebellion's sake, because you're free, because you've remembered who you are, because you've reclaimed the power that was always yours, because you've finally come home to yourself. The cage is open. It's been open this whole time. You just needed to see that the lock was always on your side. Now walk out and don't look back.